Hi, this is Jim Hodges, Principal Analyst at Heavy Reading, and I'm in Barcelona this week, and I'm meeting today with CEO and co-founder of Netronome, Niel Viljoen. Niel, welcome.
Thank you, Jim.
So, Niel, there's a lot of discussion here about NFV in terms of, we're moving towards the commercialization phase. We have to be able to scale it, and we have to be able to handle, VM mobility. So I'm just wondering, one of the obviously areas you're focusing on is SmartNICs. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what are you seeing in the show today that's kind of driving SmartNIC adoption?
So the critical first and foremost issue, Jim, I think is to do with the fact that it potentially simplifies NFV deployments. Right. I ascribe some of the slowness in deployment of NFV solutions today due to complexity. Just a simple question of complexity, the ability to integrate with different mechanisms and
right.
methods. And then you mentioned mobility. Mobility of virtual machines and VNFs within the infrastructure.
Right.
And historically, if we look at the cloud as an example, is absolutely crucial to the efficient deployment and utilization of resources, but also very importantly for simplicity of management,
right.
which drives a lot of your OpEx costs right. In this regard. So SmartNICs has the ability to solve many of those problems.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, when you think about, I think what's different in the telecom context is, SRLV and things, that some of these approach for managing virtual machines have been around for a while, but now with the sort of the telecom VMs, they're sort of more sensitive in terms of latency, so there's a lot more sort of discussion around how do I manage mobility with those, not in terms of the context of moving devices, but just virtual machines to have that VM, and we're moving to more and more distributed architecture. So I think virtual mobility or VM mobility is even
yep.
really more important from a telecom perspective. It's important in any context, in a telecom context, yep. It's pretty key.
And I think you're absolutely hitting the nail on the head there in terms of the requirements of NFV or VNFs in the
right.
telco context. It's not the same as doing a general database query or web services
right.
In a standard cloud environment.
Right.
There's packet size issues, there's all of these different aspects, and this has driven right. people to using SRIOV.
Right.
SRIOV, to a large extent, as you may know and understand, is that it does not support VM migration.
Right.
Because the hardware switching, which is part of that, is decoupled from the hypervisor infrastructure. Right. And that leads to a lot of problems. In addition to that, you have a key issue that the drivers have to be inside the guest OSs.
Right.
So if you imagine that you have these virtual machine containers right. with VNFs right. inside them, and these come from some other vendor, now you have to make sure that the drivers are compatible
and
between all
drivers.
of these.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare,
right.
to put it bluntly.
Right.
It's not a solved problem. And therein lies some of the key issues.
Right.
Even in the DPDK environment that does allow you to do some more of the migration, there's a variety of other performance issues that then arise
right.
from that again.
So you're dealing with some of these problems through, I guess, Express and Virtio, correct?
That is absolutely correct. Express Virtio, or XVIO as we call it from a proprietary branding perspective. Virtio is a technology right. which is in every Linux instance that is shipped anywhere as such. Now what we do is, because we are a SmartNIC, we can actually get the data into the Virtio interfaces at the same performance levels as SRIOV. The only point is full mobility is
right.
maintained, and secondly, performance is the same as
right.
SRIOV.
Right.
So there's no downside, if I could put it that way.
Right.
And you can only do this with a SmartNIC.
So from your perspective, your customers get obviously scalability and VM mobility, but there must be also sort of interesting use cases that can apply that as well. Are there other use cases they can apply in terms of how they use your technology?
Yeah, so obviously if we're looking at XVIO specifically,
right.
I guess the primary one is the simplicity of mobility.
Right.
The fact that your OpEx costs can be a lot lower.
Okay.
Because you can actually, it's easier to manage. It's the same thing everywhere.
Right.
You don't have all these balkanization of the the applications. This VNF needs this,
Right.
that VNF needs that.
Okay.
And now with a SmartNIC, you can have the same everywhere.
Okay.
And you can actually change it because of software definedness. So you can define different loads onto the SmartNIC, which allows you to address different parts of the market.
Okay. And one of the things I'm seeing here as an industry, I think, we're just starting to come to terms with security in terms of in a telecom context or a CSP cloud context. So, kind of what sort of drivers or what sort of change do you see with security from a VM mobility or from just a management of those VMs?
I think that's an absolutely great question, Jim. And one of the most important parts that we see here in the security segment, or in security within this NFVI infrastructure,
Right, yeah.
is that security at the perimeter
Right.
is as dead as a doornail. The performance is just not there. Trying to pass everything through a single point and then not having security within that infrastructure
Right.
is not the way things are going to go in the future.
Right.
So it has to be distributed.
Right.
So the notion of so-called microsegmentation and built-in firewalls at all points within this
Right.
infrastructure is very important. And
Yeah.
we support that with our software-based SmartNICs.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I agree with that because when you think about it, we're seeing a lot of distribution of intelligence to the edge, and to do that, you obviously have to manage the VMs to manage that instance. You know, the software gets activated or spun up. You have to manage the life cycle, but you also have to manage the mobility when that application moves from one area to the other.
I did fail to mention that, but you once again you're hitting the nail on the head the second time around, Jim. Not that doesn't happen all the time, but the critical point there is that policy, that security policy, has to migrate with the particular application. And if that's sitting on some other box somewhere else, that becomes a much more difficult and increases your cost of operations, increases your cost of actual deployment of that. So having it as a core part of the same VM and the same mobility models just makes it much easier.
Okay. What about, maybe one last question, what about IoT? Does that obviously IoT is about a lot of devices in terms of not necessarily traffic load, but a lot of sessions. How does that affect VM mobility as well?
So in terms of, if we're thinking about IoT as a traffic class, which is coming in, and we're thinking about the number of connections. So typically with a lot of IoT solutions, you have a very low data rate, but gazillions of connections. That typically creates a load on your standard server. Once again, if you're offloading that into a SmartNIC, that allows for the aggregation and the handling of that very large number of connections in a better way.
Yeah, so more efficient compute resources.
It's a more efficient compute resource to address that.
Good. Well, good discussion.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.